Okay, I have a volunteer to recite the Torah blessing.
I'll do it.
Ruma.
Can I do it in the feminine?
Do it in the feminine, absolutely, especially given today's parsha and learning. Absolutely.
Okay. Brucha at Shechina Eloteinu Ruach Ha'olam Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvoteha v'tzivatnu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen, amen. Blessed are you, source of the universe, who has given us your Torah and allowed us to soak in your wisdom and revelation. So, okay, so wait, there's someone on the screen I'm dealing with. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We've got a great parsha. I'm just trying to. Mark, do you know how to do this?
I think just hitting return should work. Go.
Ah, there we go. Okay. So today's parsha is Pinchas, and one person I'm not talking about is Pinchas, just so you know. Too violent a story for me to deal with. I'm sure there's deep wisdom there, but I can't do it. So what we'll be talking about today is are two stories, two wonderful stories, Benot Tzlofchad, which is a combination of narrative and law, and Moshe's transfer of authority to Joshua, which is a beautiful and heartbreaking episode. So I'm going to screen share, and at some point, I'm sure we're going to do a deep dive into Tzlofchad, the daughter of Tzlofchad, because it's just so rich. But at some point, wherever we are, I'm just going to switch gears and go to Moshe and Joshua. Just letting you know what's coming down the pipe. Okay, everybody, let me share my screen. Work. And just, I heard that some people were writing to me on the chat last week, and just know I don't usually look at the chat, so if you want to communicate with me, that will not be the way. Okay, so here we go. I was just studying with my chavruta, as usual, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anasfeld, and we named this together, Moving Towards the Promise, the Impossibility, and the Inevitability of Moving Forward. Because these two episodes are very much about moving forward and how do you move forward, right? And anticipating the next stage of existence, next stage of development for the Israelites. So here we are. This is one of, I mean, I say this every week, of course, but this is one of my favorite passages in all of Torah. And hopefully I will share with you, or I will make clear why. So let's just dive into this. So we are in Numbers 27, and we are introduced to the daughters of Tzlofchad, or the five sisters, as Aviva Zornberg has renamed them so that they're not referred to only in terms of their father. Okay, so the first thing we're told is Batikravna, right? They came close. So feminine verb for coming close. It's really interesting. It's also at the root of the word korban, or sacrifice or offering. So the first thing you do is come close. So that's really interesting because it's not clear what it means, because in the next verse they will stand. So did they come close before they stood up? And if they came close before they stood up, how did they get there? Welcome home. Here are some source sheets. Okay, Batikravna Benot Tzlofchad ben Chefer ben Gila ben Machir ben Menashe Mishpachot Menashe ben Yosef Ele Shmot Benotav Machla Noah Chagla Milka Tirza. So the daughters of Tzlofchad of the Menasite family, son of Hefer, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of their daughters were. The names of the daughters were Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milka, and Tirza. So notice 6 male names and 5 female names. So that's our introduction to them. Long line of men and 5 sisters. And the other piece of information is they came close. So verse 2. Vata'amodna, they stood. So again, the mysterious coming close. What did that mean exactly? We're not told. And then they stood up. Vata'amodna. They Moshe, with they Elazar, HaKohen, with they HaNesiim, B'chol Ha'edah, Petach Ohel Bo'el. So they stood before Moshe, before Elazar the priest, before the princes or leaders, and the whole community at the opening of the tent of meeting. So there's so much drama in what looks like a very simple verse, right? I mean, these 5 sisters stood up before anyone who had power in the community and before the whole entire community. Oh my God. I mean, it makes me sort of nauseous just thinking about it. Like just standing up in front of everybody to, you'll see in a minute, ask for what they want, right? Wow, what exposure, what vulnerability. And without precedent, right? I mean, who did this before they did? Okay, so verse 3. By the way, feel free, the chat is open. If you want to say things, put them in the chat, and I may look at it once in a while, I may not. Okay, Avinu. So this is what they
Rabbi,
say.
I don't think the chat is open at this point. And also the ambient noise, especially on that wooden table as people come in and move stuff around, almost drowns you out. So please be aware of that, the folks who are there live.
Okay.
Thank you.
Touch the table. And Anna, please open the chat.
Mike covered it.
What?
He said wooden table.
Oh, it's not wooden, it's for
She'll
Michael.
climb is something.
That's the problem. Okay, so yeah, light on the table. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Okay. So here's what they say. Avinu met bamidbar. הוא לא היה בתוך העדה הנועדים על עיניי, בעדת קורח, כי בחטאו מת, ובנים לא היו לו. So our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the Korach's faction, which banded together against Adonai, but died for his own sin and has left no sin. So there are different understandings of what's...
Left no sons.
Oh, sorry, and he left no sons. He also left me. There are different understandings of what sin he died for, but I'm kind of in accordance with Aviva Zornberg on her reading on this, which is like, everyone dies in their own sin, but they take pains to say he was not part of the rebellion, right? Like I'm safe. In other words, the sisters are saying they're safe, their father was safe, they're on your side, Moshe, we're not against you. My father either has credibility or he does not have credibility because of aligning himself with God. Then 4, Daled, Lama Yigara Shem Avinu Mitoch Mishpachto. So why should the name of our father be diminished within his family? Ain lo ben, just because he has no son. Not his fault he doesn't have a son, right? Tena lanu achuzah toch achei avinu. Give us a holding among our fathers. Let's stay right there. So note the frame that they're giving us, right? They're putting it in terms of their father's legacy, as opposed to first, at least, before they state their own need, right? Why should his name be diminished? And then finally, they come out with it, right? To not allow to give us, right? Achuzah, right? A holding, an inheritance, land amongst our father's kingdom. So radical claim, but I think set up very nicely so that it's sort of not exactly buried, but wrapped up in sort of ways that show that the claim is palatable for the powers that be, if that makes sense. Okay. I am going to look quickly at the chat. See if we I have a okay. Andrew, okay, so let's go on with Midbar Rabbah, the Midrash on this. Okay, but Tikhavna Benot Slochan, Gedulah lahem u'gedulah la'adim. This was greatness for them and greatness for their father. Gedulah l'machir u'gedulah l'Yosef shekach yatzu mimenu nashim chachamot v'tzidkaniyot. Greatness also for Machir. So for the whole line that was mentioned, as well as for Joseph, that such women came from them. So when you do something great, you accord greatness to your ancestors. And they were wise and righteous women. And ma chachamatan shelefi sha'a dibru. They spoke at the appropriate moment. They had a sense of timing. Why? Shahaya Moshe Osek the Parashat Nachalot. Moshe was engaged upon the subject of inheritance. So I'm not sure exactly why the Midrash thinks that he was engaged in, dealing with inheritances, except for the episode after this, he actually transfers his authority to Joshua, which is a kind of Nachalah. It's a kind of inheritance. So maybe that was it. But more importantly, I think the Midrash is pointing out something really important, which is they had a sense of timing. They knew when to step in. Right? Even if you have the most just case in the world and justice is on your side, you sort of have to choose strategically when to enter in and make that claim.
Sure, in that situation right now in the United States.
We are for sure in that situation right now in the United States in a million ways.
Yeah.
Right? How do we step in? What's the opening? Right? What's the opening? Which is difficult because sometimes, like I remember very well, here I'll just stop my show for a second to see if there's comments. Being at the Jewish Theological Seminary between 1989 and 1995 when I graduated. And my good friend, Roderick Young, who's now a rabbi, was part of a group who raised the issue, and we were all raising it, but he had no stake, a direct and personal stake in the matter, of the issue of ordaining people that were gay at JTS. And I remember so well Chancellor Schorsch, the Chancellor Schorsch saying, looking at him and saying, maybe in 100 years.
Wow.
Right, and then he went and he left the seminary and became a rabbi at HUC. And then, I forget how many years later, does anyone remember exactly when people were ordained at JTS? But not that many years later, certainly not 100.
Right.
How many times I left?
I don't know. People, students who are ordained, gay students who are ordained to become rabbis. So you can use that sensibility, it's not the right time to keep people down. And then, but it's undeniable that there is a time to bring something up so that it gets heard. It's really complicated. Would anyone in the room or in the Zoom just speak to that? Otherwise, I will go on. Yes, Wendy. Wendy in the room speaking.
This is not the first time that that Bnei Yisrael asked a favor of the change of rule, and it goes back to Pesach Sheni.
Nice.
Okay, goes back.
So
Pesach
Wendy's bringing
Sheni.
up the issue of the people who were not fit in terms of purity to celebrate Pesach, and asked for some kind of reprieve so that they could celebrate Pesach, because anyone who doesn't celebrate Pesach is not really part of the community, and they were granted Pesach Sheni. Nice. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, and so this is not the first time.
This is not the first time.
So they
Correct.
had
It is the first time that women stood up, but it's not the first time. You're right.
Right.
Absolutely.
And also I was just gonna say that these women are descendants of Jacob's Bechor, of Jacob's chosen son to accept the Bechor. And so they come from like a quote unquote royal descent.
Okay, so
Being that they are from Joseph, who is the designated inheritor from Jacob.
nice. Okay. So they come from a kind of royalty coming from the line of Joseph. But let's go back to the Pesach thing for a moment, because I just learned something very interesting one day, so I'm glad you brought this up, that the people who made the request about and they're both issues of being left out. not being accommodated or integrated into the legal system, an adjustment has to be made, right? But there's the language there, there's a similar phrase there with Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach than there is here, which is Lama Yigara. Why should we be diminished? Right? Why should we be diminished? We shouldn't be diminished, right? Because the law needs to expand to see us and accommodate us and take us into account. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, Paul. Paul, can people on the screen hear people in the room? Yes. Okay, great. Paul.
So it seems to me that there's an irony here, which is that the first thing that the daughters or the women say to each other, the sisters, is that they compare their father to the Korach's faction, whatever.
They don't compare, they say he wasn't part of it.
Well, the first justification for their request is to compare their father's situation.
Okay, good.
And what Korach did, obviously, is claim holiness.
Yes.
And their request is nearly identical, which is we are holy too. We demand to be taken into consideration with respect to the laws of inheritance. So they are claiming against the initial claim of holiness and then claiming, which seems.
Well, but they never use the claim of holiness explicitly. You're saying it's implicit.
It is, well, I would say it's explicit that their claim on standing is first predicated upon the fact that their father is not part of that faction. But the faction, the distinction of that faction is to claim holiness. It's equality.
They're both claiming equality.
Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, I'll go along with that.
One is asking and the other one is saying, I can, this is for everybody. And they're saying, give this to us. Why should, let us have this.
They're not right.
They're not saying, this is ours just by, the rights that we claim as well.
It's a whole different kind of approach. But I see what you're saying. Hold on, let me just address something in the chat, and then I see a few people have their hands up. So Luma makes the connection to Miriam, which I actually think I'm not sure why they came up, but I think that's a brilliant connection because Miriam stood, you're right, because that's a connection. She stood not in front of the whole community, it's like a private standing that made all the difference in the world because she ended up saving Moshe. But she also knew the exact right time to step in when the daughter of Pharaoh came and showed compassion, pity on the baby, right? Okay, so and I love what Margot says. Perhaps the Holy One was always waiting for folks with enough faith and inspiration to approach and ask for what is just beautiful. But unfortunately, a lot of people drown those messages out. Okay. All right, so Luna and then Amy.
Okay. So I want to address the fact that you were talking about coming close and standing. I think that's a really important noticing, which is something I never noticed before. And the actual act of coming close, you can't really stand for me unless you come close to the source of what it is you're standing for. And standing in itself is a statement. To take a stand the way you stand says something about you and your connection, not just to God, but to the community and to yourself. So the very act that they're taking a stand amongst their kinsmen, first they're coming forward, right? They're coming forward, they're walking. And they could have just said they came forward, but no, it's very clear that they took a stand, that they're very clear about what they want, that they're aligned with their needs. And yeah, maybe it came at the right time. I kind of have a problem with that. That seems like very patriarchal, like we have to wait for the right time before we speak. I'm more connected to the fact that they took a stand. And again, that it comes from the point of Miriam taking her stand and watching.
And just remind me, you said you're more connected to what, everyone?
Well, I think the fact that Miriam stood was the beginning of learning to take a stand, to be able to stand in alignment and to watch and to witness. So Miriam was witnessing, but here they are standing in alignment with themselves and what they need and what is deserved. And to take a stand is to really open up to the flow and sovereignty, taking you to the doorway of presence.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think the other thing about coming close to me, and Aluma, I'm not sure you'll like this, but I'll try it. Maybe someone else will like it. But, you know, I once saw someone confront a very well-known rabbi, this is years and years ago, in a way that was successful, even though it was public. So the rabbi was kind of mistreating somebody, and this person, who was a friend of mine, confronted that rabbi in public, but in a way that in no way shamed him, but felt like it came from a place of closeness to him, and that's why he was able to be heard. So I think that's unconsciously how I'm reading closeness. Like, they're aligned with Moshe. They're saying, the first thing they're saying, our Father's not with Korach. We're aligned with you. We're connected to you. And what we want is in line with what you want, not because they're denying what they want, but because they're trying to figure out how to frame it politically so they get what they want. See, I don't think there's anything wrong with being strategic, which is where the timing thing comes in. But it's not as pure or spiritual as what you're saying, Aluma. I think.
I like that. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't like the idea that it's phrased from a man saying they knew when to talk. That I find troubling. But I understand what you're saying.
I hear. Okay, Amy. Happy birthday, Amy.
Thank you. 22nd of Tammuz. My question, I have a question. Were you speaking of the daughters of Zilpah?
Tzlachad.
Am I saying that's the 5 daughters who wanted to inherit?
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Do you know how their father died?
It's not written in the Torah itself, but I'm imagining that you have something midrashic up your sleeve here.
Well, you know me. I believe that their father died, and I could be wrong, would love to be corrected, but I believe that he died from collecting sticks on Shabbat, and he knew that this was wrong and that he was willing to sacrifice himself to prove how important the rules of Shabbat were.
Nice. So, so some interpretations say he was the Mikoshesh, because the Mikoshesh, I think, is not named in the Torah.
What does Mikoshesh mean?
Mikoshesh was the one who collected sticks on Shabbat.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how he would correlate with Korach, right? Korach was doing something to prove a point, and their father was doing something to prove a point, both points of Torah.
But that's interesting. If it was a dishonorable reason he died, that they would have the nerve to say, well, he wasn't one of them.
Right. But instead he did this, but they left it out, which is even more strategic.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. I don't see hands, so we're going forward. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So, all right. So this is one of my favorite midrashim in the world. So it says in the Sifrei, to describe the level, we're in source 4 now. It says, "Kevan sheshamu benot Tzlachad, sha'aretz mitchalakat b'shvatim v'lo lenekevot." So when the daughters of Tzlachad heard that the land was to be apportioned to the tribes and not to females, "Niskabsu kulan zo al zo litol etzah." They gathered together to take counsel. So I love the idea that they had a meeting about it, right? They organized and they said, and they amru, they said, Lo kirachane basar v'dam rachane hamakom. So the mercies or the compassion of human beings are not like the mercies of God, here referred to as hamakom. Basar v'dam, human beings, rachamav al haskarim, nekevot. So for human beings, they care more about males than females. Ava, Mi she'amar v'haya olam eino chen. But the one who spoke and the world was is not that way. Ella al hazcharim v'al hanekevot. Rather, regarding the males and regarding females, rachamav al hakol. God's mercies are on everybody. As it says, Tehillim in Psalms, Tov Hashem Lakol. God is good to everybody. Rachamav, and God's compassion is al kol ma'asav, is on everything that God created. Which means not only males and females, but all human beings and all creatures, and all everything. Kol ma'asav. So that's really radical, coming from the time it comes from. This is about 200 CE. Wow, wow. So they almost it's like the rabbis kind of spoke what they weren't ready to hear. This is unbelievable that they would imagine an egalitarian God. So they had, they were expansive enough spiritually to imagine a God that was way beyond who they were. We're not that way, but God's that way. And they're imagining also the kind of God that the daughter of Tzlopchad appealed to, so that they could do what they needed to do.
Recording something, they're not just saying it.
Yes, and they're using proof text to prove it.
Evidence-based.
Absolutely.
Not anachronistic proof text, because of course, when they were alive, these Psalms had not been written.
The Psalms predate the rabbis. Oh,
The Psalms
Tzlopchad.
predate
Oh, I see.
the text,
I see.
Right.
So yes, that's funny. So they're imagining the daughters of Tzlopchad calling on a proof text of Psalms which had not yet been written.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very cool.
But they intuited it.
They intuit it. Exactly.
They challenge.
Okay, so that's a beautiful midrash that we should all remember when we think about justice in the world and God being on our side, or God being on everyone's side. Okay, so let's go on in the Torah. So what happens? So what does Moshe do? So this is really interesting because the word that's used for what the Benot Tzlopchad initially do, the five sisters initially do, is used for what Moshe does in response. Vayacharev Moshe et mishpatam lifnei Adonai. Moses brought their case closed to God. So Moshe himself had nothing to say about this. I spoke a little bit about this in my sermon last night. Moshe was effectively silent in response to their plea. And I think there are two reasons for this, possibly. One is Moshe is so used to hearing complaints and let's go backwards again and again. And these daughters actually want to go forwards, give us an inheritance. Right? They're imagining the next stage of Israelite existence. Instead of saying, let's go back to Egypt, let's go forward. And then the second one, I think, is because Moshe himself is being denied a chance to go into the land. This might be too painful for him to consider. Right? Ouch, you guys get to go where you women get to go in, and you're asking for land, and I can't even go in the land.
But this is the same as case as Shani, where the decision was made by God.
Yes,
This is the same as,
yes,
so there is a consistency.
that's true. Okay, so let's see what God says. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Rabbeinu. So God says, Cain benot Tzlopchad dovot. Benot Tzlopchad, the daughters of Tzlopchad, are speaking justly and rightly, right? And if you think about the midbar, the place where this is all happening, the wilderness, this is a place of language. It's a place of revelation, and it's also a place of complaint, right? So the complaint is bad speech, the revelation is good speech, and finally we have some human language here, which is good, right? Some davar, which is
Positivity.
sort of positive and productive. Naton titen lahem achuzat nachala. Give them a holding of land, or hereditary holding. B'toch achei avihem, in the midst of the brothers of their father. Ha'avarta, so note that word because that will become important. Ha'avarta, in the text about Moses transferring authority. Ha'avarta et nachalat avihem lahem, transfer or pass over their father's share to them. This word ha'avarta also has in it, so it means to transfer over, to cross over avar. It's also at the root of ivri, which is Hebrew. Okay. So Abraham was the first, crosser over. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to the next piece. Check the time. What time is it?
9:15.
Okay, so now, something even more radical happens. Not only does God hear their plea, but it's their case is now integrated into law. Right? So this is what happens, it becomes institutionalized. The El B'nai Yisrael to daber lemor ish ki yamut uvein ein lo ba'avartem. Again, that word to pass over. Et achalato levita. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows: if the householder dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. No daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. There's no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers.
Sisters.
I know, we're the sisters. I'm just thinking about that. No sisters here. We need some sisters to stand up instead of the daughters of Slothai, sisters of Slothai. אם אין אחים לאביו ונתתם מנחלתו לשארו הקרוב אליו ומשפחתו וירש אותה. והייתה לבני ישראל לחוקת משפט כאשר ציווה אדוני משה. His father had no brothers, who shall assign his property to his nearest relative in his own clan, who shall inherit it. This shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with Adonai's command to Moses. Okay, so this is interesting. Now, Aviva Zornberg about this, and this relates to something that we've already been talking about. I think this might be in source 8. The reference to their father's sin is also mysterious. Perhaps his daughters fear that Moses may be prejudiced against them if their father was party to that rebellion that was directed against the leadership of Moshe and Aaron. On this reading, the women are aware of possible bias that needs to be neutralized. So in other words, again, they're strategic. In other words, they have a realistic sense of the political field in which they must stake their claim. A similar awareness informs of Zohar's explanation of Moses referring the case to God. He recuses himself of the case to avoid any suspicion of prejudice against Slothai as a rebel against Moshe's leadership. Here again is a reminder that truth is to be found within a force field of political power. So what I think is interesting here is that it's a little bit, it reflects the conversation I was having with Luma. So that, even if justice is on your side, where you're speaking from a place of just justice, you need to speak in a way that translates into the real political moment. Right? And how do we hold those things? So what I'm observing in society right now, and I know this might be, I don't know how everyone's going to hear this, how this can land, is that for a lot of people, when there's no absolute justice, there's a lot of anger as opposed to dealing with the real political moment and translating just claims in a way that will somehow work in real politics right now. And this is such a treacherous moment, but it's so hard for us to hold injustice and not see justice done. And many of us are very frustrated. We as a diverse group, many of us are very frustrated, right? So, but how do we work with the moment? And I know it's a difficult moment, maybe even a horrible moment. How do we work with reality? So they're working with reality. Okay, so I'm going to call.
I think that's shown by the fact that sisters are not granted. It was little victory. It wasn't a complete victory.
Yes, it was a partial victory.
Yeah.
It was a victory within a patriarchal context.
Step forward,
Absolutely. What's partial about it? What's
That they
partial about
got, that the daughters got, even though there's no mention of a wife who
it? No
inherited.
mention of wife, there's no mention of father, sisters, and ultimately they will only be able to marry into their tribe.
Right.
So that their tribe won't lose the holding, so their actions are actually constrained.
But they're chipping away.
It remains patriarchal. Okay, I'm gonna call on people only now that haven't spoken. In Zoom and in the room. So Jay.
Thank you. I guess I'm still stuck on this notion of partial victories. And the importance of timing is everybody knows, I mean, ask any comedian, the timing is critical. But in this context, it's especially important for people that don't have other means of looking out for their interests and are powerless. So I think we all need to keep that in mind. And God is not sexist, but unfortunately, it seems like the rest of the world is often. So my question then becomes, what is the ultimate victory? In other words, the change in law, like we know the Jubilee may never have actually been practiced. So my question is, did in fact the laws of inheritance meaningfully change from that time going forward till modern times in terms of women of an all female family that the women inherit?
So people who know me know I know literature and not history. I really don't know if this translated into ancient Israelite society. I have no idea. It was a great question.
But yeah, and that's sort of also in the meme of God may not be sexist, but unfortunately we have a long way to go, the rest of it.
But that's what the Mishnah said. God's not sexist, we are, right?
Yeah,
we are.
yeah, right, exactly.
Right. I mean, they acknowledge that. So how do we push that forward now? So Miriam Margot, did you read it?
It was amended later to that they had to marry within their father's tribe.
Right, at the end of the book of Numbers.
Right.
Right, but I think Jay was asking a question about how did this actually work in ancient Israelite society, not the Torah.
And further on, yeah, like Jubilee, Jubilee may never actually have been practiced. So I'm just wondering, did this actually translate to reality, so to speak?
Whether it did or it didn't, it makes a practical difference that it's in our literature in terms of our own consciousness, I would say. Back to
partial victories.
That's exactly, partial victories. Okay, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm new to this group. Happy to be here. I was just thinking about the word recusal, like Moses recused himself from making a judgment because he might have been prejudiced, which is not something a lot of leaders that have judicial power have done in our country. So that was just a thought that I had.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the fact that Moshe would acknowledge that and step out of the way and not exercise his usual power. Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you.
Yep.
I just wanted to echo this notion of partial victory that I've been thinking about a lot this week. And I feel that I'm 24, but so quite young, but the more I'm on this life journey, and it's a spiritual journey for all of us, the more I find that there's just so much work that we each are given in our lives to do, like inner work with others, but really like the work of tshuva and the work of healing the things that we're given that are hard and that are painful, and that keep us stuck in Mitzrayim. And so more and more I've been feeling that these partial victories are everything, right? This quote in Pirkei Avot, it's not your job to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. And from that, these little partial victories are so also monumentous.
They're collectively monumental. Beautiful. And Naomi, I want to add something to what you're saying, which is really powerful. By the way, when I was 24, all I wanted was absolute justice. I had no patience. So you're my mind, way ahead of the game. But something I learned from my friend Rabbi Sharon Konanisfeld, who I often quote, she teaches Hasameach B'chelko, which is also in the Ethics of the Fathers, which Naomi just quoted. The person who's happy with their portion is happy. But the Sameach B'chelko, portion actually means partial or part. Mm-hmm. None of us is whole. I remember when I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, I initially hated it as a rabbinical school. Then I realized, this could only be maybe this is only part of my education. I went to Israel, I went to Jewish, I went here, I went there, I studied all over the place. Once I accepted that it was part, it was okay. And I think when we accept, and it's really hard, that we're part and partial and incomplete, and will not be completed, then there's a level of acceptance, which I have not quite gotten to, that moves into our lives. And we live our lives perhaps with more ease. Because we can't be all of it. And you know, when you pick a life partner, they can't be everything for you. They're also a part. Right? So you have your friends, you know, all your resources. So anyway, thank you. Thank you, bro. Thank you. Add one more thing. Yeah, okay.
And it's important to remember, and there is something we're aspiring to, and whether you call it Mashiach, revelation, consciousness, whatever, but that there is a place in which we're all whole. And yet, like in this life, it's our job, as you said, acceptance is the way to love other people, to love ourselves, acceptance of the partiality.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and I agree. Keep the aspect, like, don't give up on absolute justice, but realize that in the world, it's not going to be absolute. And I keep thinking about like Rosa Parks and, you know, refusing to go back to the back of the bus, which I also mentioned yesterday, which helped initiate the civil rights movement. But the civil rights movement was also partial. Like, how radical is that? And yet the civil rights movement is also very, very partial, as we painfully see in our time. Okay, oh my God, there's so much to talk about. What are we gonna do? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Just building a little bit on what Naomi and Robert Diane said. You had that realization while you were at the Jewish Center.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 24 different ages, and we're talking about Moshe, and you know he has this intimation of his demise, of his mortality.
Yeah.
And some people died without having accepted their realities and the momentous quality of these partial victories. But we can also see that he maybe glimpses that, and that's another reason for his acceptance.
Beautiful. Yeah, and we're gonna get to Moshe and that story in a few minutes. Alina, you want to say something?
No, I'm just very touched by what you're talking about.
Thank you. Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I wanted to echo what the young person in the room said from an older perspective.
Aren't other young people here?
Yeah, aren't the victories are always partial. And you look at your own life, you look at your own day-to-day existence. You know, have I been kind in every moment interacting with others? No, but I'm asymptotically approaching kindness towards others. If you look at the broader society, why is it that we have evolved this elaborate system of law and governance? You know, we've got people here in the United States, we've got representatives and senators who are constantly passing laws, constantly. And it's because we need to keep moving forward. And it's one of these things that you just can't reach an endpoint with it. You're only ever going to, at best, asymptotically approach justice. And you know, we're all keenly aware of the absence of justice that's been occurring right now here in the US with this recent Supreme Court stuff, which is horrifying. But it can't be any other way. I mean, right here in the room I'm sitting in, I'm only approximating who I want to be. And I'm only approximating who I want to be in my relationship with others. And I'm only approximating who I want to be in my relationship with this kahila. And this is the human condition. It's always approximate.
That's what I'm thinking about is what you said some weeks ago about the occluded gem. Perhaps we're all occluded gems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rachel. Thank you, Beth. Rachel, then we're gonna go on. Some more text.
I just want to say that it was brilliant of Moses to kick it upstairs to God. Totally brilliant. Totally brilliant. Because he doesn't have to deal with the kvetching. And also, you know, he knows that he's writing a Bible for us. And this is going to get top billing. It's going to get our attention forever and ever and ever. And I really have to pray that we have something like that, because when I do my political action, I'm pretty gutsy. But I don't think there's going to be anyone that I confront in government with power who's going to say, well, why don't we ask God? You know? So that's it.
Maybe they ask God in the privacy of their own homes or their own temples, whatever they may be. It's interesting, Rachel, what you're saying, because not only did Moshe kick it upstairs to God, but there's commentary that says, I think the Midrash and in Rashi, that the the daughters of Slocha, actually wrote this part of the Torah, not Moshe. Okay, so we're going to go on. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go to source 12, and then we're going to go to, let's see, 12. All right, I love this. I think we're just going to read this in English.
Oh, no, that was really good.
Which one?
In the generation, the women would
That's what
repair
I was
what the
gonna-
men had breached.
Yeah, read it, Alina. Go
In
ahead.
the
Wow.
generation, the women would repair what the men had breached, for the men had not wanted to enter the land. The women drew close in order to request a portion in that land. Therefore, this section was related on the heels of the death of the generation of the wilderness. There the men had breached and the women had repaired.
So as I was saying before, every other page in the Torah, especially the book of Numbers, but also the book of Exodus, is we want to go back to Egypt. We don't like the manna. We want to go back to Egypt, have the fish and the melons and the wheat, the garlic, the onions, right? Like we want to go, and then they, at some point, I think after the spies, they even started organizing to have a band go back to Egypt. Oh my God, so they keep wanting to go backwards. What this Midrash is doing is saying, the people want to go backwards. They were men, and the women actually wanted to go forwards. Right? That's fascinating. And wanting to go back to Egypt is a fundamental challenge. This whole enterprise, because God took them out of Egypt, right, to be a people and to go into the promised land. The whole point is going forward. And they are no, we want to go back to slavery. Right? So here the rabbis are aligning the women basically with God's will, and the men as the complainers and rebels.
Is that in the Torah or is that a midrash?
That's a midrash. Yeah. Okay. Want to do quickly.
I was going to say that more than 1,000 years later, the Chacham in the Talmud kind of codified this concept that whatever a woman brings into a marriage, she leaves with. That whether she leaves by divorce or by the death of her husband. So if she brings, in the Talmud, it says whatever land she brings into the marriage, the husband is allowed to use that land and profit from
But
the
she has
land
to keep it.
while they are married.
Right.
Once she leaves the marriage, either through divorce or through the death of the husband, she reclaims that land separate from the amount of money that she's due from her
That's
ketubah.
really interesting. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to read this to just cap things off, and then we're going to go to Moshe and Joshua. Perhaps the most important legacy of Slechad's daughters is their call to us to take hold of life with our own hands, to move from the place that the others have given us, or that we have decided to keep, because we feel immovable, and to walk even to the most holy center, to where nobody seems to be able to go. So I think this is a wonderful invitation, the daughters of Slechad, for us to think about where might we come close and stand where we think we can't, and what difference might that make, and ask for what we need or for what others need, for that matter, talking about justice. So that's the daughters of Slechad. So if you remember in the beginning, I framed this as, these are narratives about transmission and about legacy. So first we have the daughters of Slechad and their inheritance and their stake and claim in the land. And now we have Moshe's death and the transference of authority. So I want to look at that with you. Asher Chaim, are you still here? Would you read? Because my voice is getting tired.
Thank you. My internet is a little wobbly, but I'll give it a shot.
Okay, great.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה, עלה אל הר העברים הזה, וראה את הארץ אשר נתתי לבני ישראל. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moshe, go up to this Mount Ha'avarim, I can see you've highlighted it because it's very richly layered, and see the land which I have already given to the Israelites. וראית אותך ונאספת אל עמך, גם אתה כאשר נאסף אהרון אחיך. You will see it, and you will be gathered to your people, you too, just as Aaron your brother was gathered to his people. כאשר מריתם פי במדבר צין במריבת העדה להפתישני ומים לעיניהם הם ממריבת קדש מדבר צין. As you rebelled against my mouth in the wilderness of Tzin, at the quarreling of the community, to make me holy through water before their eyes. Those are the waters of Merivat Kadesh in the wilderness of Tzin. Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. Moshe spoke to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh saying, I heard a brilliant Torah about that this week. Yifkod Adonai Elohei haruchot lechol basar ish al ha'edah. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh shall appoint, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who is the God of breath, spirit, shall appoint a person for this congregation. Asher yaseh lifnehem, v'asher yavo lifnehem, v'asher yotze'em, v'asher yevi'em. V'lo tihyeh adat Adonai katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh. Someone who will go out before them and come back before them and will bring them and bring them out and bring them in, so that the people of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh would not be like a flock without a shepherd.
Okay, let's stop there for a few minutes. Beautiful. So first, as Asher Chaim indicated, God invites Moshe to Har HaAvarim, so the passing over mountain, right? Where Moshe will see the land that he won't pass into. And where he will be ultimately gathered to his people. He will pass on. So that's number one. So that repeated theme of passing over of our land. And I think the way Moshe asked God for, to transfer his authority is just so moving to me. So first of all, he calls God Elohei haruchot l'chol basar. And we'll see a beautiful midrash about that in a minute. So, the God of the spirit of all flesh. So, speaking to some kind of great, democracy or democratizing spirit in God. And then he says, he's concerned that his people will be like a flock that doesn't have a shepherd, right? Moshe really cares about his people. Okay, go on, Asher Chaim.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה, קח לך את יהושע בן נון, איש אשר רוח בו, וסמכת את ידך עליו. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, take for yourself Yehoshua son of Nun, a person who has ruach, spirit, within him, and you will press your hand over him. ועמדת אותו לפני אלעזר הכהן ולפני כל העדה וציווית אותו לעיניהם. Stand him up in the presence of Elazar the officiant and in the presence of all of the community, and command him in front of their eyes.
So this is an amazing echo of what the daughters of Tzlachah did, which is stand before the whole community. Right? So they were leaders, you know, in the model that God is imagining a leader, standing before the whole community, what that means. Okay? Sorry.
ונתת מהודך עליו למען ישמעו כל עדת בני ישראל. You shall place some of your glory upon him, so that all of the people of Israel will hear. ולפני אלעזר הכהן יעמוד ושאל לו במשפט האורים לפני אדוני, על פיו יצאו ועל פיו יבואו, הוא וכל בני ישראל איתו וכל העדה. And in the presence of Elazar HaKohen he will stand, so that he may ask him about the judgments revealed through the Urim V'Tumim in the presence of Yud Hey Vav Hey. By his mouth.
Okay, so let's stop there for a minute. So I want to do one more midrash review, which I totally love. So this is something amazing about leadership and about this passage. Okay, so Moses, here it says about this moment, Moses at the hour of his death asked the Holy One of Blessing, Master of the universe, the ideas of each person are known and revealed before you, and not a single one of your children is identical to each other. When I am separated from them, in other words, when I die, if you will appoint a leader for them, please appoint a person who has patience with each and every one of them according to their individual personality. Wow, what a beautiful concept of leadership. From where do we learn this? From what we read regarding this issue. Let Adonai, the God of the spirits of all flesh. In other words, the way that Moshe is imagining and calling God at this moment, right? The God of spirits for all flesh is the kind of leader he believes Israel needs, which is connecting to every person on their terms, right? And accepting of every person and who they are and leading from that place and having patience for that. And we all know that's not easy. So, all right, let me stop there. And I see there are a few hands. I'm not calling people for the second time. Amy, if you have a comment, please put it in the chat. And we have Bob and then Nehemiah. And we have to leave very soon, so please be concise. Bob, you've been to all kinds of beautiful places lately.
Yes, we'll talk about it. What I think is so great about the interpretation we just read is that because Moses had the experience of growing up in the palace with the Egyptian royalty, then he lived in Midian with his father-in-law and future wife. Then he leads the people. It's the fact that he's had so many diverse experiences that would allow him to realize people don't all think alike. You have to understand them each in their own terms. Dibarti.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bob. And this actually relates to real politique because, you know, to speak to all kinds of different people, you have to learn how to speak to people's listening, right? So that they can hear you, even though you shouldn't lose sight of what you have to say. It needs to be framed carefully. Okay, Nehemiah.
The transfer of the lineage of Kabbalah happened before Moses and Joshua, but it never happened in public. It was the first time it had to be done in public. Therefore, it was done in a ritual, because before that it was transferred according to Yehuda Levi from Adam Kadmon. However, he put his hands, and according to the Midrash, this mystical Midrash, Moshe was like the sun and Joshua was like the moon. He transferred his light. And these lights were transferred afterwards from generation to generation. And somewhere it was lost. We still put our hands, but the lineage is not transferred anymore. So Rabbi Zariah Kadosh wanted to renew it. He wanted to renew the real smicha, so the rabbis would be mekubalim. and the rabbi in Jerusalem stopped him from doing it. So the smicha, I respect very much all the rabbis who receive and give smicha, and there's always blessing and put in the hands, but the full lineage, part of the lineage, is passing in another way through tzaddikim, nistarim, through hidden tzaddiks, not in official way. So we don't know. We have to find them.
Okay, so I think what the Rebbe is saying, just to translate some of his terms, smicha is laying on of hands.
Yes.
And the Rebbe is saying that the process has been interrupted, this transfer of authority, and it happens ultimately through the righteous people whose identity is hidden.
The transfer of the light of the Kabbalah is not happening anymore through the putting of the hands.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. So just to wrap up, and then I think Miriam Margot has a little song for us, Dapenot Slocha, so we'll get to you in a minute. But to wrap up, so let's think about a little bit about going forward here. So Benot Slocha display a willingness to go forward and are willing to step forward, right? So that they can be part of the legacy system of the ancient Israelites, and receive a legacy from their fathers. That's pretty amazing. So that's one way of imagining the future. And then the other part of sort of going forward here and going towards the promise is the death of Moshe and imagining the next stage of leadership. And so, on one hand, it's grief-filled, and on the other, it's full of care for the Israelites not to be left leaderless and to have the right leader, and to have a leader who will be sensitive and compassionate to all of these rights. So, there's all this complicated mechanisms about going forward. And, it's tricky, as we all know, like how are we going forward individually? Each one of us at whatever stage of life we're at, and how do we go forward as a society? And sometimes I know that, and, I, along with you, or many of you are concerned about all the very disturbing things happening in society. And then I also wonder, oh, wow, there's signs here of a new way of being. Maybe a new way of being is being born, and these are the birth pangs, which I know is also sort of tricky thinking, because I would never want to ignore the difficult things and not address them in some way. So that's all I have to say for today. And let's listen to Margot's song, and I'll leave you to your after party.
Thanks, Rabbi and that's confidence. You haven't even heard it. It's a cute takeoff on Who Tells Your Story from Hamilton. Who are we that have the courage to speak freely, stand tall before the powers that be? We are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza, daughters of Tzalafachad, 5 strong sisters, each her sister's keeper on the journey to our land. We are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza. Now our father's gone, what will come of our name? Who will tell our family sorry? We believe in the kingdom, a land of milk and honey, where justice and wisdom will sing of God's glory. We are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza, daughters of Tzalafachad, 5 brave sisters, each her sister's keeper. Hand in hand we stand, talking justice to the man. Moses, our father, was a good man, even though he had no sons. His name should not be banned. Please take our case to the Holy One, for the sake of the orphan, the powerless, and all women. We are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza, daughters of Tzalafachad, 5 strong sisters, each her sister's keeper on the journey to our land. Moses says, listen up, O children of Israel. Hold on, there we go. The laws of these 5 sisters is true, God tells us, and in their love for each other and their strength, they bring down the justice of the Holy One. Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza, they put themselves back in the narrative. In their story, I see hope for the disenfranchised of today. They are Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza.
Bravo, bravo.
Oh, that's amazing.